I'm Mike, and today we're going to be taking a look at a video I did back in 2020 where I looked at flat pack bikes, or box bikes if you will. We're going to take a look at some of the faults that people make when they put them together and how to spot them. So let's have a look. Well, there's a few things that I've seen coming in that's reoccurred. We've seen the same fault over and over, and a few things I've seen when I've been sort of driving down the road. I've been cycling out myself, and I've seen a few faults I've just dropped over and said, "Oh, excuse me mate, do you know this?" and just sort of put it right there and then. Sometimes I don't have the opportunity to, but sometimes I do. Anyway, one of the main things that I see while we're out there is issues with the front of the bike, and I think that's mainly because when the bikes come flat packed, the rear of the bike is kind of already assembled. You might have to drop the seat in, but essentially the back of the bike's already done. What happens is they flap the front of the bars off, they turn the fork round, they take the front wheel out, they may disconnect a brake lever or a brake cable or something like that to enable the bike to fit in the box. Of course, the bars are the widest part, so you can see straight away they get put like that to make the bike streamline and fit flat in the box. So that's kind of where we get a lot of the faults, and one of the main faults that we see are the brakes on the wrong way around. And it's not the brakes as such, but what happens is, because the forks can turn, the only thing that stops them is the cables. But a lot of the time, they're sometimes not connected. So what happens is, the forks end up getting fitted like that, because that brake is facing that way. You can see it's facing that way. So why wouldn't that one? So it's an easy mistake to make, and people sort of just drop the stems in and off they go, and they leave the wheel, the forks facing the wrong direction. So the forks should face that way with the brake facing out over. And you might think that's not important, but it kind of is, because these cables are designed to run in a certain way, and if you've got them running the wrong way, you can see already when you turn left, that's going to pull. It's going to catch the frame, it's going to pull the brake on, so it can be quite restrictive. Also, the wheel sits slightly further forward. If you can see that on the camera, you probably won't be able to. But the, I can get a fork here. The wheel, if you imagine this is a pair of forks here, imagine this is the wheel, I've just got the disc in here. You might have seen this set up before, so I used it on my brake demo. But you can see there that the wheel sits slightly further forward of the forks. If you imagine me riding the bike like that, my wheel's slightly further forward. If that's 180 degrees out, my wheel's now sitting slightly towards me, slightly back over, which makes the wheelbase a bit shorter. It makes the vehicle or the bike handle completely differently to what it was intended, and make it a little bit twitchy, and yeah, it can just affect the way that the bike rides. So it's important for that reason too, as well, to change the forks and make it face the right way. You can also get the same fault with disc brakes as well. So there's nothing to stop the disc brake being fitted the wrong way around, and you see them sometimes with the discs on my right here when they should be on my left. So when you're riding down the road, the brake should always be on the left, and the quick release skewer is the same. The quick release skewer should always be on the left as well, unless it's got some specific fork that's got like a through axle where the axle will only go in one particular way. Sometimes that sort of denotes which way it goes around. So you can see on this bike, the wheel's facing forward, the quick release is on this left hand side, which is where it should be the non-drive side. That's the drive side, that's the non-drive side. So this is correct. Now it's easy to get muddled up because the headset, or this here, that's got all the bearings in it, is round, and the stem is too. So if I slacken this stem off, I can just turn the bars and the forks don't move. So I could put the forks that way and I could tighten the bars up like that. It's easily done. So always make the forks face forward. Now while I'm on the subject of headsets and stems and things like that, I want to show you two different types of stem. Now you've got a Quill stem, which is one a lot of some of our older people may recognise, me certainly, which is this type of stem, and it has like a little wedge at the bottom. So when you tighten this bolt up, it draws the wedge up, and it basically wedges itself in the stem, in the fork, sorry. So we have one here, and you can see there, this is the fork, this is the head of the threads on the top where the bearings go on, which is just here. And then the fork just sort of sits inside, the bearing sits inside the fork, sorry, the stem sits inside the fork, and it's all wedged together. So you imagine that is just it inside there. So when you slacken that off, slacken the nut at the top, what you do is you drop this bit down into the forks, and it allows you to turn this full thing, adjust it to where you want, you tighten it back up, that wedge rises back up again and wedges it all together. Really simple, and it's been around for years. Now this has got one of these quill stems in, so if I take this out of here, you'll be able to see. I'll just give it a wobble. There you go. So you can see there the stem with a little wedge on the bottom of it there, shaking around, and the forks are held in by the nut and all the bearings inside. So those forks don't come out of there. That's why it's very easy to put that on the wrong way around. So when you're putting these stems in, or indeed any stem, just make sure when you drop it in that you've got the cables nice and tidy, the cables aren't tangled up. And because I'm building this in a stand, what I always do is I don't put it at the lowest possible height. I always just nip it up very, very slightly, and then I just give it a little nip because I'm going to put it on the floor, centre the wheel up over the top of it. You might remember some people, they put the wheel between the legs and they give the bars a wobble. You can do that as part of an M-check as well if you wanted to. But yeah, that's how I do that, and I just make sure that when I put the bike down on the ground that the bars are centred, the wheel's centred, and then I tighten it up properly. One thing as well that I just mentioned and I alluded to there is the height on these. So the height of the stem can be adjusted by just moving the stem up and down. And there's a little mark on here that says limit, insertion limit, and that's basically how far the bars can go up before you start risking them being too high. So on this bike, there's a little mark there, and the mark shouldn't be visible. You should just drop that just below where the little dotted mark is. So that's as high as those bars will go. And the reason that there is a mark really is because if I show you on this one, if it'll slacken off, that if I take these bars up, again these will have a little mark on them as well, which is there. These are a lot lower actually. These ones will sit there. But if I go too high, what happens is, see the little wedge, you can start to actually see the wedge. Can you see that at the front? There's the wedge there. So if I tighten that up there, there's a lot of leverage on that fork straight away because you've got this amount of leverage going back and forth. But also, it hasn't got a proper grip on the steerer tube there on the actual fork itself. So it'll be very easy for it to start wobbling loose. So the reason that those marks are there is to make sure that there's enough of the stem inside the fork, so it doesn't damage the header, it doesn't damage the forks, and also that it stays there and it doesn't bend. So that's what those marks are for on those stems. Similar to a mark that's on a seat post, which I'll come to in a bit because that's another thing that I've seen in these last few weeks. So that is a quill stem. You still get quill stems today. They're not sort of phased out or anything like that. They're a very simple way of having the stem attached and adjusting the height, that sort of thing, and just a nice simple way of assembling the bike. So what I'm going to move on to next is one that can be quite confusing because it looks very similar, and it's called the A-Head stem. And these tend to come on some of the newer bikes now, or maybe certainly some of the more expensive, like the higher end ones. It's not a new design. It's been around probably since the late 80s, early 90s. I would hazard a guess at. I know I had a bike in about 94 that had one, 95 possibly. And it looks very similar because I've already put an Allen key in there. It does have a nut in the middle, just like the quill stem. Now if I can show you one of these stems, this is an A-head stem. This is the same stem that's on this bike, funnily enough. And it has a bolt at the top, and it has some bolts at the side. Now that's the clue, that's the difference. If you look at your stem and it's got some bolts, there might be one on one side, one on the other, two on one side, that sort of thing. That's indicating that that's not a quill stem. And it's very important to know the difference, and I'll tell you for why, is that this sort of little bolt at the top, which looks like the one on a quill, doesn't do the same thing. There is no wedge on the end of the stem. You can see already that this stem is just a stem, and if I take that top cap off, it's just hollow. So you can see the difference straight away between that stem and that stem. That's got a shaft with a wedge on the bottom that wedges inside the steerer, wedges inside the fork, and that one's just hollow. So how does that one work? Well, it's a similar sort of idea, but what happens is it clamps onto the fork steerer instead of going inside it. So that's how that works. Now the reason that we have this bolt at the top, you say, well, what's that for then? Why have we got that top back cap? That's not really a securing bolt. What it is, it's an adjuster, it's a preload adjuster. And what it does is, I can actually take this bolt out of these forks here, and the forks won't fall out because they're held in by these two bolts on the stem. So if I take that out of there, there we go, the nut will fall off, but the forks stay in. They're still attached to the wheel, they're still tight, they won't fall out. Because this is for assembly, when you put the bike together, this is what you use. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to demonstrate how that works. And that just goes in there. Now if I slacken off these two bolts at the side here, we get the same sort of thing as if the quill stem was loose. So the bars and the forks can move independently. Yeah. So that's the way that you can make your forks face the correct direction. You can slacken off the two boards, take half a turn off that top cap, and you can adjust your forks if you need to. The difference being is if I now take this top assembly bolt out of here, that can come off there, but also the forks can come out. You can see the forks are dropping down. Can you see in my thumb there? The forks are actually coming out. And that's because the only thing that holds the forks in is the stem. So the forks go through the bearings. You can see it's pushed the bearings out the top there, so they just need to pop them back down again. And that's what holds it all together. So what you do, you set all your bearings up. If you were replacing your headset, you'd replace it. If you were just lubricating it, you'd lubricate the bearings. You put it all together, you put your spacers on, you get this little top cap thing, you screw that in. That will hold it together for you for the time being. And that gives you your preload adjustment on your bearings. Now if you tighten that right tight, what you're doing is squashing all the bearings together, and it'll make your steering very, very stiff, and it'll damage your bearings. So all you're doing with that really is you're just giving that a little nip up, and you'll feel, if you go too tight, you'll feel it, because what happens is the steering goes really tight, and you can tell that you've overloaded the bearings there. So I'm just going to pull that tight there like that. I can still move the handlebars because I haven't tightened the side bolts up yet. So that there is a bit too stiff, really. It needs to be a little bit slacker. But it's worth sort of giving it a little bit nip too far, because then you know how far you can go and you know where your stopping point is. So you can slacken it off a little bit and you can feel your bearings. That's much better. Just not even quarter of a turn, and that's okay. And then you can tighten your side bolts. Now I think it's important to know that with a quill stem, you can adjust the height. We've already seen you can make the height go up and down, because this shaft is sort of a length that can be adjusted inside the fork, as I showed you earlier. The same can't be said for an A-head stem. When you do A-head, your bars will only go as high as your fork steerer will allow it. And you can see on this red bike just behind me, there's some spacers there. So there's 3 spaces on this one. That's your band of adjustment really. The fork needs to be visible through both of these. There's no point having just the fork steerer in the middle. So if that fork steerer sort of stops there, only one of the bolts is holding it all together, that's no good. It has to at least come to just shy of the top of there. And some people even put a spacer on the top of there to put it all together, to make sure that this fork has a good purchase, this stem has a good purchase on the actual fork steerer, and that's fine. On this bike, the rider wants it as high as it'll possibly go, so there's 3 spaces there. Nothing at the top, but I can see there's enough for it to hold it all together, and it's not going to be clamped tight where there's still a lot of play. So you can put the bars down by taking a spacer out and put it on the top. If you want to go down a bit further, you can take another spacer out and put it on the top, and vice versa. You can't put it any higher. The only way to sort of adjust these, if you want the bars higher, is to change the stem. If you want the bike lower, you can put the stem on the other way around. So you could drop that stem. You can see the stem has a slight rise, so you could drop it the other way and make the bars a little bit lower for yourself if you wanted to. You can buy adapters as well that bolt on, and then your bars bolt onto that, which is like a stack. It makes them higher again. Not a great fan, if I'm honest. But if you need that for whatever reason, then that's fine. At least it solves a problem that gets a bike so that you can, in a state where you can ride it. So yeah, if you are needing to tighten your bars up and you realise that they're a little bit loose, and if your wheel stays still, put it between your legs and you can move the bars, just have a look at what stem you've got. Have you got a Quill, or have you got A-Head? And if you have got an A-Head, don't start tightening that bolt up really, really tight, because you're not going to do anything other than squash the bearings more than you need to. If there's any questions with that, I appreciate this is just a whistle stop tour, so if there's any questions on that, drop me a comment and I'll have a look at it for you. But as I say, that it's very easy to get those two muddled up. I appreciate that. I have made myself a little list of things that I need to speak to you about. It's just behind me. You don't need to read that. I appreciate the camera doesn't pick it up. One of the things I've put on there is seat post height limit. So much like the steering, a lot of the time with flat pack bikes you've got to put the seat in, because the seat will be loose in the bottom of the box. You've got to put the seat in. There's actually a mark on a saddle. The camera should be, yeah, you can pick it up there. It says insert. So when you put the seat in the bike frame, it goes down. That's as high as that seat can go to that mark. If you've got it any higher, it's much like the Quill stem. You get too much leverage. There's not enough of the seat post in the frame, and it can really damage your frame. So that mark is there for a reason. So if your seat has to go higher than that mark, then you need to get a longer seat post. And don't just buy a seat post, because they're all different sizes. They're a nightmare. A lot of them have the size on. So this one actually says 25.6. So I would need to find a 25.6 post that's longer than the one I've already got. Don't be tempted to go past the mark. It can damage your frame, especially aluminium or carbon frames. So don't do that. Pedals. A lot of the time you put pedals on, because again, just like your bars, the pedals make the bike wider and it won't fit the box. So they take the pedals off. Usually put them in a little box or a little cardboard tab, and they put them in the bottom of the box for you. They're sided, and the reason they're sided is that when you pedal, if they weren't, they would come undone. So what happens is they put a right and a left, and the reason for that is that the left-hand pedal is a left-hand thread. What's a left-hand thread? Well, they're all sort of righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Doesn't apply to a left-hand thread, it's the wrong way around. So to tighten up a left-hand pedal, you actually undo it, if that makes sense. And how can you tell? Well, a lot of the time they'll have R and L on them. So on this one, you can maybe see at the end, it's got an R and an L. So that means right, left. Some manufacturers are quite helpful, and they colour code them. They'll put a red and a green sticker on, and they'll put a red and green sticker on the arms. So when you go to put the pedals in, you know which one goes where. And they sometimes even put a little arrow on for you as well, which is handy. If you can't see the lettering, then the left-hand pedal always has some sort of markings on it. So the shaft on this pedal here is just smooth, but the one on the left-hand pedal, you can see has some sort of little corrugated lines put on it, and that shows as well that that's the left-hand pedal. So you know if you're putting that one on that side, you turn it the wrong way. You don't go righty-tighty, you go lefty-loosey, you tighten it on. And that's so that when you're pedalling along, the bearings aren't tempted to slacken the pedal off and make the pedals come off while you're riding. Tyre pressures, again, if you, as a guide, you've got a tyre pressure on the side. It depends how long the bike's been in the box for. They'll pump the tyres in for you before it comes out the factory. But by the time they get to you, they're probably going to be dropped. So have a look at your tyre pressure, see what it recommends. Put your tyres up to the pressure they recommend, or something somewhere near. It's obviously it's personal preference. It's the type of tyres you've got. It's your weight. It's that sort of thing that depends on how hard you need to put the tyres up, or how much pressure you need to put in them. Get them so that they're hard like an apple, not soft like an orange. And again, like I've said in the videos, just nip the sides. Get them so they're hard. Give it a ride. If you're not happy with it, either let them down, pump them up. It's just a trial period, especially if it's a new bike, just to give it a run and see what you're comfortable with. And also, while we're on the subject of tyres, rotation. If you've got a bike that's just got a normal cantilever or a caliper brake or a V brake, you could put the wheel in the wrong way around. It's very easy to. If you've got a disc, you can't, it only goes in one way. So make sure you put the wheel in the right way, that the tyres rotate in the correct way. There's usually a little arrow, there's one on that one there, it says rotation, and it means pointing forward. So when you're on the bike, the arrow at the top pointing forward, make sure you get that in the right way, otherwise the tyre doesn't perform as well as it should. It can be a little bit noisy and it can wear it out prematurely as well. The tyres are designed to rotate in one direction. If it doesn't say anything on there, have a look at the tyre, see if it's an obvious arrow type pattern, and it should be facing forward from the top. And if it's not, it probably doesn't matter. I've done the seat post. One other thing that I wanted to mention about was just sort of general gears and brakes. That the bikes are built in factories and they're obviously put together at a rapid rate, probably even more so now than ever before. And a few bikes have come to me that they've just needed a little bit of a tweak on the brakes. Have a look at my previous videos and it'll tell you how to do tweaks to gears, tweaks to front and rear gears, tweaks to brakes, including cable disc brakes. Hydraulic brakes shouldn't need a tweak because it should be set already. The only difference being is you can slightly move the caliper if it's getting a bit of a pinging noise, but that's a separate job altogether. If you've got cable discs and cable V-brakes, have a look at my other videos that I've done in the past and it tells you how to set those up. Again, I had a couple of bikes that have come to the Wednesday cycle clinic drop-ins that I've needed to do a few little adjustments to the brakes and gears. It's a lot of the time it's just through the speed that the bikes are done, but also a cable settling down while they're in the boxes, and then by the time you get them out of the box, the cables will settle a little bit and the gears have gone out of adjustment slightly. That's about it. Seat height I've mentioned regarding the limit marks, but as a rough guide, when you're on the saddle you want to be on your tiptoes with your feet on the floor, tiptoes. That's a rough guide. There's all sorts of science around setting seat heights, and I don't want to get into that. I just want to give you a rough idea that if you're on your tiptoes when your bum's on the seat, it's somewhere near. If there's any questions that you have that I haven't covered, I appreciate that this is just a whistle stop tour about flat pack bikes in general, and it is trying to just be quite generic about bikes. Some bikes have suspension units on, you've got to check the suspension units, you've got to pump the fork pressures, you've got to do rear shocker pressures, all that sort of stuff. This is just about a basic run-of-the-mill bike that majority of people would probably purchase to get them to work and back, or just to get them into cycling really. But you don't have to spend a fortune to enjoy cycling, you know, you can just get a half decent bike and just make the most of it. So thanks for watching.